Hello and welcome to episode 106 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Today I'm joined by Jared Greer, a business coach, leadership expert, and operational leader with a unique path from sales to private equity. In this episode, Jared shares how communication became the through line in his career, from waiting tables and knocking on doors to coaching executives and guiding companies through change. We delve into why empathy is underrated in business, how simplifying your message can increase impact, and the 4-step framework he uses to persuade with clarity and confidence. Let's dive in. Jared, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Scott.
Looking forward to the conversation. We go back a good bit, so I'm sure we're going to have some good stuff to talk about. Before we get too deep into it, maybe tell the listeners just a little bit about you, your career journey, and the great work that you're doing today.
Yeah, I love that. My career, started a lot in sales for really as long as I can remember. I've been doing some kind of sales. I started, working at the age of 14. Had lots of different kind of restaurant jobs and server jobs, and always kind of had a sales component to it. Worked at the University of Phoenix for about a decade. Primarily leading sales teams and obviously doing sales on my own as well. That all kind of led to this journey of doing leadership development. I got a job working at a consulting firm, really my first job outside of sales, where I was working with different functions inside an organization and working really on cross-functional communication. We were helping IT teams understand how to talk to the finance team how to talk to the IT teams, HR, how to talk to the business people about the business. So lots of flexing of the communication styles that I learned there. That then led me to my wife and I, we were in DC at the time, and we didn't want to ride that ride anymore. We sat around, looked at all the people on the metro, and we were like, wow, these people, they're miserable. We don't want to be miserable. And so we hightailed it out of there down in North Carolina, where I started my own leadership development company. And then that actually parlayed into a coaching practice where some of my, customers from my leadership development were like, hey, do you do coaching? So kind of started doing that. That moved into business coaching, where I was focused on executive coaching and business optimization. And then about a year ago, and did that for almost 8 years. And then about a year ago, I was invited to join a private equity firm to essentially help operationalize our new portfolio companies that we bring into our portfolio. So, been there now for a year, have learned a ton about communication, learned a ton about just business in general, and it's been an interesting. I never would have planned it. Would never planned to end up where I'm at. But all the kind of twists and turns along the way have brought me here, and it's been a fascinating ride.
Yeah, definitely a fascinating journey. I knew about some of the steps along the way. I didn't know all of them, especially the most recent ones. A couple things that jumped out there is one, a lot of learning, and two, the idea that communication really is that connecting thread across success in all of those. And you talked about early on, especially very young, working in the restaurant industry and things like that, where I'm such a huge proponent of people working in a service industry at some point of their life because they can learn so much from it. And I think really those communication skills are honed and sharpened very, very rapidly in that type of environment.
Yeah, totally. And I failed to mention probably one of the biggest catalysts of my communication was actually serving a 2-year mission for my church, where I was in Michigan for 2 years, going door to door, talking to people about Jesus. And you always can look at your communication in circumstances where it's easy to communicate.
Mhm.
But where your abilities can really grow and develop are in those circumstances where it's really, really hard. So going door to door, that's really, really hard. Lots of rejection associated with that. Having really hard conversations as a leader and a manager of people, that's really challenging. Laying people off, firing people, those are really tough circumstances where you really start to develop yourself as a communicator, if you care enough to.
My boss always says it's easy to lead when times are good, right? True leaders show their worth when times are hard, there's challenging situations, and I think very much so the same with communication skills.
Yeah,
It's not super challenging to be effective in your communications when it's just everything's flat and level and even. There's not a whole lot of change going on. There's not stress. There's not uncertainty. But when you're put in those situations where there is an unknown, there's organizational changes going on, there's competitive environment, there's rejection, which those folks listening to this in sales deal with all the time.
totally.
That's really where you get to put your communication skills to the test. And it kind of transitions nicely into the first thing I wanted to talk about was, when you hear that somebody is a great communicator or they have these strong communication skills, what's the image that comes to mind for you?
I think of when somebody has strong communications skills, I think of somebody who is they're very present. That you said the word image, and so now I'm thinking, okay, imagery is like they are present, they are engaged, they're interested, they're not only a good communicator, but they are a good listener. They're understanding, they're comprehending, and then they're responding. And I think of that communication as, one idea passing over to another that is well received. And in some training I've done in years past, I talk about all of the issues that are associated with communication, where, the speaker initially has to kind of think through and decipher their own thoughts and say, okay, this is what I think. That then has to get communicated down out of their mouth and across to someone who then has to hear it first, second, decode it in their own mind, and then articulate it back through their mouth to the other person who has to go through that same process. And so there's a ton of margin for error as we think about communication. Of course, we see that all over society and in business and in the communication broadly. But I think of somebody who just is very engaged. They're a great listener. They're able to understand and maybe ask questions to understand, and then articulate back a message that gets well received. I think those are kind of key components of what comes to mind when I think of somebody who is a good communicator.
You mentioned there's so many opportunities for something to go wrong, right? And to get misconstrued when there's communication. And it reminded me back to when we were younger, and I especially even with my kids, when they were younger at school, right? Everyone has played the telephone game where it starts at one end of the classroom, somebody has a message that the teacher gives them, they whisper it to somebody else, they go to
Totally.
their classmate, and by the time it gets through 10 or 15 kids, the message is completely unrecognizable. And that's where I think about communication, simplicity comes into play.
Yeah.
A lot of times people feel that in order to be a great communicator, they have to have this expansive vocabulary and have these lofty ideas and big, big messages. But I think if you can keep it simple in your communication, and the other thing that you touched on is being present. We hear a lot about executive presence and people who have a presence about them, but I think in order to do that, you also do need to be present. And I think about times when we worked together at Phoenix, where we would be in meetings with some of the senior leaders and they were not present, right? They're on their phone, they're on their laptop working on some other project that the big boss asked for them. When you're with your team and you're communicating, be present, keep it simple. And I think it brings down the risk of your communication being misunderstood or not being received and interpreted appropriately by the audience.
Yeah, love that. I also think that communication is just two-way, and it cannot be somebody at the front just talking. There just has to be a reception of an idea. There has to be some inquiry about a current state of the other that allows us to then be able to understand and really fine tune that message. And to your point, the simpler, the better. And if we are, again, great communicators, if we're great communicators, then we're using the language to describe situations and circumstances that our audience would use. We're being very, very, we're almost verbatim what they would say. That's how you get people nodding their heads and saying, yeah, you're right. Okay, yes, I'm on board. This guy gets me. I now understand them and they understand me, and now we can kind of move forward.
And I would imagine in your current role, as you talked about your onboarding, I believe, new organizations into the portfolio for this company, that it could be easy to fall victim to using your jargon, your company's very specific language, and assuming that they know what it means, right? You obviously want them to all start probably speaking the same quote business language as they're coming on to make sure that things are streamlined and operationalized and there aren't errors. But kind of getting people to fully understand what things mean and communicate clearly is going to be critical. And with the work that either you're doing now or have done throughout your career, getting departments to talk to each other and consulting with businesses, what are some of those key communication skills that you're seeing as really being mission critical? If these companies want to succeed, if they want to do well as they're getting onboarded or getting their departments to talk to each other, what are some of the skills that are either critical or that you're seeing people do really well that's helping?
Yeah, it's super interesting. So I was brought in. So our private equity firm has a very specific way that we expect our organizations to run, a management system, if you will, that essentially goes from the very top of the, stack of here's the objectives, the high level revenue and EBITDA goals, and then we break that down into, okay, here's the work that we need to do to be able to accomplish those goals. Here's all of the roles and responsibilities. And then under that, here's all the ways that we're going to measure that. And then there's even a very specific way that we expect them to solve problems. And to your point, when we buy these companies, they do not operate this way. They might have little fragments that are similar. They might have components that they've heard before. They've read the latest business book, and so they kind of have an idea of certain aspects of it, but they don't understand the system in its totality. And so my job is then to basically help them learn it, adopt it, and then integrate it kind of as fast as possible. So what has to happen is very first, there has to be a component of education. So it would be one thing for me to go out and say, go do this thing. I have to explain that thing. I have to teach about what that thing is, how that thing works, what happens if it doesn't get used or we don't do it right. What are the impacts of that? And not just in that isolated, metric or that isolated function, but to the business as a whole, to the, top line revenue or to EBITDA. And so that education component is one, something that we haven't done phenomenally in the past. We've kind of said, hey, here's the system. We've pushed them a book or two, said read the books, and then kind of go on. And so that education of like really breaking down the key components of the system, teaching them what it is, how it gets impacted, I'd say is a fundamental need. Secondly, I think, and again, as I think about communication skills, that's so broad. There's so many. So I think I also have to bring to the table a sense of directness and clarity. I have to simplify these principles, to your point, to be more simple. And then I got to be really direct about what good looks like and when we're not achieving that. And that's a different kind of communication because, again, you've got to communicate that in a way that is well received. And candidly, it's not always well received. But it's got to be done. So I think, that education component, that clarity component, that direct component, and then I would probably say the last one that I just think is a critical skill is that kind of empathy component of how well do we really understand where our people are coming from, what their struggles are. And all along that process of the education, kind of teaching the simple ideas, giving direct feedback, there has to be this idea of, and sometimes this is hard. And I know what it's like to be hearing something or trying to learn something while I've got a million other things going on. And so that ability to be able to empathize with where any of those leaders are at, I think really is a critical skill in communication and one that's probably, not as often leveraged in the workplace today.
I do think empathy is one of those skills that really is lacking. And you nailed it right at the very end there, because I was going to ask you a follow-up question around is how do you balance that directness, having to be direct that, hey, things aren't going right, we're not hitting where we need to be, and the empathy. And you gave a couple of concrete examples about how you position that, because you've been there before. You've gone through these types of things. You're having leaders in your business experience where it's challenging to get this type of news. You have a lot on your plate. You're trying to change. You're doing these things, but at the same time, we're also not getting to where we need to be. I think sometimes people feel that they need to be one or the other, and they don't quite know how to mesh them together as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I love to teach is just the kind of a process for persuasion. And essentially that always starts with empathy. It starts with us really looking at what does life look like from their eyes? What are the challenges that they are facing? What does success look like for them? And the more we can say that, articulate that using their language, the better off we're going to be. Then once we've really truly empathized, and kind of a key, marker for people is if you can't use language that they would use, you haven't done enough inquiry. So you're actually
Mm-hmm.
going back and you're saying, I'm going to go find out more. Hey, what do you find most challenging about this transition? Or, hey, when you think about the metrics, what do you find most frustrating about it? You want to hear them say, I find this frustrating, so that when you're empathizing, you can say, hey, I can totally appreciate you feel frustrated by this. And too often we're making assumptions. We're kind of like, being very general and vague, and we're saying, yeah, this is probably frustrating. But how much more impactful is it if we're saying, you find this frustrating because you've got 17 other things, and this is one more thing on top of it. And they've already said that. Of course, they're going to say yes. Then when you've empathized, then you can move into this visualization. You can help them start to see not only what success looks like, but maybe some rewards and benefits that they haven't thought of before. So they're now looking kind of higher level, bigger picture, like, maybe they're thinking down the road, hey, I hear how frustrated this is for you to be able to really be looking at all these metrics because you've got so much going on. But I want you to know this is a critical piece to you being able to manage your team from 30,000 foot view and really being able to be strategic and really have more fun in your role. So that's a visualization of like, this is what it can be as, we face these challenges that you currently face. Then we relate, meaning we share a story, whether of our own or personal experience, or maybe we, you share a story of someone else, somebody who's prominent. You say founder of Amazon, or, you say, hey, when I was, very first a manager and I had all these new metrics, this is what I did. This is what I experienced. And then finally, as we kind of go through those first three steps of empathize, visualize, relate, then we can request. And that request is too often we're asking for the whole shebang. We're saying, so will you do this thing? Or will you, accept my offer? Or will you, go fire that person? When really that request should be appropriate for the next step. So it might be, would you spend some time with me and really sit down and look at your schedule and how we're managing your time around the metrics? Would you sit with, John over there and really get a sense of what is even available in terms of metrics? Versus, will you go and build an entire dashboard full of all of the metrics of your company, by next week? So those are kind of core components, I think, of that ability to persuade and bring others along. And it all hinges on our ability to really be empathetic. A long way of saying, I agree, empathy is critical.
That was a fantastic example. I love the process. I love the framework. And as I think through that, for me, a big part of it when it comes to persuasion is this idea that we have shared goals, right? So as I'm working with someone, we want to identify here are the things that we both agree we're working towards. So in your scenario, you talked about we want you to be more strategic, to kind of be able to have the time to take that 30,000 foot view of your organization to make things a little bit more efficient. So as you agree, these are things that we want to work towards. Then as you're asking that next ask, right? What's my reasonable ask? Being able to tie it back. So the reason I'm asking you to do this is we want to get you to a point where you're freed up to do blah, blah, blah. Or ultimately we have these types of tools and dashboards that are going to help us do A, B, and C. So I think really get aligned as to what are we both working towards? What's our North Star? And this works personally, it works professionally, it works with family, with friends, at your kid's school. You kind of take this thoughtful approach, you empathize and work through a process, you'll definitely see results with it.
Yeah, totally agree.
Jared, as you think through your career success, if you had to point to, this is the key communication skill, right? If I held you to one, like what's the most important communication skill that you have that has helped you to get to where you are today?
Yeah, and I'd be curious of what your other guests have said, because I actually think that the defining factor for me has actually been probably courage. It's been a willingness to try to have the right conversation, a willingness to try to communicate something new and different, a willingness to be bold, and all of that really comes down to like courageous moments. I remember one of the first times that I had to fire a guy, and essentially I was afraid. I was afraid to do it, and so my direct supervisor did it. But thankfully, he was like, "But you're going to be in the room." So I had this employee, I called HR, I went through all that process, and we had finally, come to a point where we were going to fire him. And we sat in this room while my boss essentially fired this my employee. And I just remember sitting there feeling terrible about myself. Not because it was, the wrong decision or, we shouldn't be firing this guy, but because I should have been the mouthpiece for this. And I was too afraid to do it. And so I decided right then and there, I will have those hard conversations. I will be the one to terminate people when we need to terminate. That's kind of on the negative side. On the other side, when I was a new manager and I had a team of like 15 and I was way out of my depth, they pretty much needed somebody with a pulse. And I raised my hand, I had a pulse. And so they were like, great, we'll let you manage 15 people. Um, and I remember trying to teach them pretty much how to do things the way that I had done things, which is also, not always the best strategy. But I remember I had gone and I had found another manager in my building who was really great. He's an awesome communicator. He could teach real well. And I asked him to do some trainings for my team. And so he started training my team and they loved it. They loved it because this guy was so good. And they would come to me and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, hey, look, I did this, and man, Jake was so awesome." And listen, maybe call it ego, but maybe call it like a little bit of self-reflection. I started to really dislike that they were coming and talking to me about this other person who was not their manager. And I kind of had that same idea of like, I should be the one teaching these people. And if I'm not adequate, if I'm not capable of teaching them, then I've got some more work to do. And so I then made again another conscious choice to shift and become someone who could teach my team. And listen, those early days, clunky as can be. I'm certain of it. I'm sure if I went back and I looked at how I was communicating back then, I think it would be horrendous. However, those days were necessary for me to be able to develop the skills and abilities that I have now to be able to go and stand in front of a room of, 100 plus people and teach concepts, in very comfortable way, very comfortable format. So I would say courage is kind of that first step that people need to, kind of get on that path of communicating. Um, Yeah, that's where I'd go. Courage. Have you
The,
heard that
the,
one before?
I don't think I've heard that directly. And what I was going to say is, yesterday I recorded an episode with a guy who was talking about boldness, really being able and willing to step out and do things and try things and operate under the guise that I might mess up, it might be bumpy, I might fail, but I'm going to learn from it and keep moving forward and keep growing. And to me, that's about communication. So
Yeah.
much of your communications aren't going to land right because it's dependent a lot upon how the other person is going to receive it. all of the background that they bring to the table. So I could give a message to you, Jared, and because of your journey and your background, you're going to receive it different than if I give it to somebody else. So it is just understanding that I need to try it. I need to be willing with getting bruised up a little bit, learn from it, and move forward and keep going through that cycle. And you're going to get better. Just like I talk a lot about with sports. I know you do a lot of endurance type sports. It's just getting out there and being sore. And then maybe the next day you go a little bit farther, a little bit farther, a little bit
Yeah.
longer until you get to where you need to be.
Can I share a quick story about that? Because it's
Absolutely.
you're dead on. We have, and it is going to be clunky. It's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. Shortly after I started my business, my coaching business, I was hired by Aflac to fly out to Washington State and basically kick off one of their regional sales meetings for 300 people. So I'm kind of like, yeah, this is awesome. I would love to do that. So, we commit, go through all the process of the paperwork and, payment and whatever, and then I'm working on building this training. I'm supposed to be on stage for 3 hours, and I am kicking off their, year essentially for their sales team. And so I work tirelessly to try and get this presentation to where it needs to be. And I'm the kind of guy where it never feels like it's done, never feels like it's good enough. And so legitimately, like a couple days before this thing, I am still trying to figure out like what is the right message for this group. I was doing one session was like a smaller group of like their most senior leaders, and then the other was the general session. And I go to the airport, Scott, and I am like full on panic attacking. I am sitting there and I'm thinking, I can't do this. I had never presented to a group that big. I had never had so much pressure on me to be a effective communicator. And I tell my kids this all the time because it's such an important story. I didn't want to get on the plane. I had the very serious thought of calling my sponsor saying, "Hey, sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it. I missed my plane." I was going to lie and like tell them I missed my plane and just apologize and let them just hold the bag for this, training. And, for whatever reason, I'm like, I gotta go do it. I've got to go try, get on the plane. I mean, the entire time my watch is like beeping saying you're super stressed for the next like, 18 hours. I get there, I'm still working on my presentation till like, 2 in the morning. I go out. My only goal is like, please don't let me sweat through my suit. Like I'm just panic all over. And it went fine.
Mm-hmm.
It went fine. I got great feedback. I got just really good feedback. It wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I was very casually dressed. They were all in tuxedos. I was like, I clearly don't know my audience. I'm thinking Aflac insurance guys, like they're probably rolling up with what I'm rolling in. But it was just such a pivotal moment in my communication journey because I could have shied away. I could have backed out. I could have canceled. And I don't know that I would have recovered from something that big. I would have regretted that for a very, very long time. And so I just say all that to say that ability to just be bold, be courageous, take that leap, knowing it's not going to go well. Like it just isn't going to go well those first couple of times. And you're always going to be looking for something to be better, but just committing to being somebody who communicates clearly with courage, I think is a great first step for people to kind of move in that direction.
And if you go into it with the mindset of really just understanding 99.9% of the time, the audience that you're going to be speaking with, they're rooting for you. They want you to do well, right? They're not
Absolutely.
actively rooting against you. And they don't know what you know, and they don't know exactly word for word what you're going to say. So if you flub a word, you say something different than you had planned, they don't know.
Right.
So I think if you just kind of go into it with those two mindsets that you're doing it, it helps to bring those nerve levels dramatically down. Helps you kind of approach it. You said, be bold, be courageous, get out there, take that step. People always talk about, right? You regret the things that you didn't do versus the things that you did
Totally.
do. So go for it.
Totally. Totally.
Jared, who's someone from throughout your career or your life that's influenced your communication style? Maybe you've kind of taken something from them and made it your own.
Yeah, we had a facilitator at CEB, which is now Gartner. So that was the consulting firm that I was at, um, who is a phenomenal communicator, just a great facilitator. I would watch him kind of in front of a room, and everybody was just locked in. Everybody was listening, hanging on every word. He's an exceptional mentor to me in lots of different ways. But I'd actually known him for several years prior to even working with him inside this consulting firm. And he was somebody who I would call and I would say, "Hey, I've got this kind of situation. Like, how do you think I should handle it?" And he would kind of coach me through those really hard conversations. And there were many times where some of those conversations were about employees who I was struggling with, or maybe they were about, you know, offers that I received for employment to negotiate salary or to be able to give somebody a promotion or change somebody's behavior. And he just was always somebody who's, number one, very well educated. So he's just a very thoughtful person. Number two, he's so willing to help and so interested and a great listener. And so when he then gives his guidance, you feel like he understands you, you feel heard, and then he gives you good, credible advice and guidance that works. So that kept me coming to the well multiple times. He's been a great mentor. I talk to him, almost weekly still, even after having been there for so long, so long ago, and get his advice, get his perspective. And sometimes I go to him because I know he's going to disagree with me, or I know he's going to have a different perspective that then just helps me either get more committed in my position or, address kind of my position and adjust as needed.
The thing that jumps out to me there is just ask. Sometimes people are afraid to ask for help, whether it's from their boss or someone in their family, whatever it may be. Just ask, because you'll be amazed by how many people out there really want to help. Similar to you, I have people from throughout my career that I still stay in touch with. From my first career as a teaching, from the decade I spent at University of Phoenix, people that I respected, that were always very thoughtful. They were leaders. They had just a great way of looking at things from a different perspective. And I don't know that I've ever once been turned down when I've asked somebody for help. You'd be surprised how excited people get to help somebody out. And for me, now it's paying it forward. So that when I get requests from people that are maybe more junior in their career, sometimes it's a random LinkedIn thing where somebody saw a video that I put out. They maybe asked me a question about
Yeah.
it. It's just about really helping because we all just get better together. Jared, as we're wrapping up here, what piece of closing advice would you have for folks listening to this? It's really about the importance of the skills that we talked about today and the impact that they can have on their lives.
Yeah, I think fundamentally people have to just acknowledge that in order to do something right, you've got to do it wrong first. And so that means we just get up to the plate, we take swings, we strike out, we make mistakes. My wife and I were just talking, a week ago about tough conversations that we have had across our marriage. We've now been married almost 20 years, and how it doesn't matter if we are not good at tough conversations. What matters is that we continue to have tough conversations because I believe consistency precedes quality. And so the more consistently we have those tough conversations, albeit maybe poorly or incorrectly, um, we'll get better at it. It will breed that quality that we really seek. And it has truly, we look at where we were at year one versus year 20, and it's completely different. So I would just say that for anybody who's, kind of on their communication journey, like we all are, we're always looking for ways to be better. Do it consistently. Just try. Have that courage to just get at bat, make mistakes, because that is how you're going to learn. Like, oh, okay, that didn't work this time. Next time I'm going to try this over here. Oh, hey, that worked. I'm going to always do that. Now I'm going to try this new thing. And it just builds and builds and builds until you are a good, effective communicator of your ideas, of strategies, of plans or instructions, whatever it might be. But it just really starts with us being willing to have those conversations.
Absolutely. And you said it so well. In order to do something right, you have to do it wrong first. And in today's hyper polished, hyper edited society, people often look at people and think they were always like that. When you see somebody that's an effective communicator, that was polished and honed over years and years and thousands and thousands and thousands of reps and at bats to get to that point. So knowing that the first time out of the gate, it might be rough. You're going to stumble over some words. You're going to be nervous. Might not go as exactly how you wanted, but you keep at it. You keep practicing, getting the reps in. You will get better, and you eventually you'll do it, quote, right. And that's
Oh,
always
yeah.
always evolving.
Quote right. Yes.
Exactly. Jared, thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on, Scott.
Have a good day.
All right. You too, brother.
Special thanks again to my guest, Jared Greer, for joining us and sharing his insights on leadership, empathy, and the role of courage in communication. As we close, here's a reminder. Communication isn't just about having the right words. It's about knowing yourself, respecting others, and creating the space for honest dialogue. Subscribe to Communicast so you don't miss future episodes with leaders and experts redefining what great communication looks like. And if this episode resonated with you, please leave a rating or review. It helps others discover the show and supports our growing community. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.